What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Tuesday, February 23rd. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we got a 9-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the point guard position. I like Kyrie Irving from the Brooklyn Nets playing the Sacramento Kings, who have the absolute worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Kyrie Irving has averaged 44.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 35 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He scored 48 and 30 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 39 and 33 minutes. He's projected at 43.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's $8,800 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. Now, Kyrie Irving has scored 52 and 65 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Kings. Now, there's going to be no Kevin Durant, so he's got an elevated usage rate, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 242 points scored in this game. So a super high scoring game, a great game to stack. So I like Kyrie Irving here versus the Sacramento Kings. So the other point guard that I like here tonight, keeping in mind that Sacramento-Brooklyn stack, is Dee Aaron Fox from the Sacramento Kings playing the Brooklyn Nets, who have the 5th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing point guards, Dee Aaron Fox has averaged 38.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He scored 31, 39, and 30 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 39, and 31 minutes. He's projected at 39 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's $7,900 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. So Dee Aaron Fox has scored 38, 34, and 43 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Nets. I just love this super high game total of 242 implied points in this game. So I like Dee Aaron Fox here versus the Brooklyn Nets. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. Now, this is going to be a value play on FanDuel. I like Seth Curry from the Philadelphia 76ers playing the Toronto Raptors, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing shooting guards, Seth Curry has averaged 21.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 17% usage rate. He scored 28, 11, and 36 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35, 38, and 36 minutes. So he's playing way over his season average in terms of minutes per game, and he's projected at 23.5 fantasy points here tonight. On FanDuel, that's 5.9 times value. He's only 4,000 FanDuel salary, but he is 1,400 more on DraftKings. So this is a FanDuel value play for me. So he scored 28, 33, 5, 34, and 13 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Toronto Raptors. So 3 of those 5 games, he'd be crushing value on FanDuel. So I like Seth Curry here versus the Toronto Raptors. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Josh Jackson from the Detroit Pistons playing the Orlando Magic, who have the 9th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Josh Jackson has averaged 24 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 24 minutes per game with a 27% usage rate. He scored 31, 23, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 23, and 26 minutes. He's projected at 25.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's $5,100 FanDuel salary and $700 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. He scored 31, 21, 28, and 33 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Orlando Magic. So I like that player versus team history. He's got a good matchup, and he's been playing a bunch of minutes. So I like Josh Jackson here versus the Orlando Magic.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $100 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won,
and then we'll send you $100 PayPal.
So it's that easy,
and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video.
So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Now you guys don't need me to tell you about these studs, but I just got to point this one guy out because of the absence of Kevin Durant, the fantastic matchup, and the insane implied game total in terms of points. I like James Harden from the Brooklyn Nets playing the Sacramento Kings, who have the absolute worst defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. James Harden has averaged 51.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 38 minutes per game with a 27% usage rate. He scored 64, 54, and 64 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 40, 37, and 36 minutes. He's projected at 51.2 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's 4.7 times value because he's 11,000 FanDuel salary and he's 300 less on DraftKings. So James Harden has scored 62, 52, 60, and 54 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Sacramento Kings. Now he gets the Kings with no Kevin Durant, so his usage rate is going to be through the roof. Fantastic matchup, super high scoring game. Hard to get away from this play here tonight. So I like James Harden here versus the Sacramento Kings. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. This is a FanDuel play for me. I like Chris Middleton from the Milwaukee Bucks playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing small forwards. Chris Middleton has averaged 37.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He scored 64, 37, and 27 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 35, and 37 minutes. He's projected at 38.8 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's 5.4 times value. He's only $7,200 FanDuel salary, but he is $1,200 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. Now, Chris Middleton scored 32, 40, 40, 29, and 41 fantasy points in the last 5 games versus the Timberwolves. That's pretty good history, with him cracking the 40 fantasy point marker 3 of those 5 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 232 points scored in this game, so a high-scoring game. So I like Chris Middleton, especially on FanDuel, here versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Okay, now here's a DraftKings play for you. I like Kelly Ubrey Jr. from the Golden State Warriors playing the New York Knicks, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing small forwards. But Kelly Ubrey Jr. has averaged 28.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 43, 47, and 44 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 36, and 43 minutes. He's projected at 31.4 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 4.1 times value because he's priced way up at $7,600 FanDuel salary, but he's $700 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. He scored 25, 46, and 32 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the New York Knicks. So I like Kelly Ubrey Jr. on DraftKings here versus the New York Knicks. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. Here's a value play for you. Well, a value play on FanDuel, a value play on DraftKings, and a mid-range play on FanDuel. I like Nerlens Noel from the New York Knicks playing the Golden State Warriors, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Nerlens Noel has averaged 18.9 fantasy points per game on the season, but that's when he was only averaging 19 minutes per game with 11% usage rate. Take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 24, 21, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 28, 29, and 27 minutes. So he's playing more minutes than his season average, and he's projected at 26.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.1 times value. He's $5,300 FanDuel salary and $400 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. So I think this makes a really nice DraftKings play for under 5K, $4,900 DraftKings salary, just on the borderline of a value play, a mid-range play here. But Nerlens Noel has scored 35 and 28 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Golden State Warriors. Now he's playing 27 to 29 minutes per game. And it's a good matchup. So I like Nerlens Noel here versus the Golden State Warriors.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, here's another nice DraftKings play for you at the power forward position. I like Chris Bosher from the Toronto Raptors playing the Philadelphia 76ers, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing power forwards. But Chris Bosher has averaged 29.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 23 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He scored 33, 19, and 23 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 25, 21, and 22 minutes. He's projected at 29.9 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 4.6 times value because he's $6,500 FanDuel salary, but he's $700 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 224.5 points scored in this game, and he scored 31, 1, and 41 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Sixers. Not sure what happened with that 1. I'm guessing he didn't play much. So 2 out of those 3 games would have been crushing value on DraftKings. I think his price is just a little bit too low on DraftKings. So I like Chris Bosher here versus the Philadelphia 76ers. Okay, moving on to the center position. I like Clint Capela from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have the 8th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing centers, Clint Capela has averaged 40.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He scored 37, 60, and 42 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 31, 31, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 42.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.1 times value. He's 8,200 FanDuel salary and 300 less on DraftKings. Capela has scored 47, 39, 35, and 39 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that's pretty good player versus team history. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 227.5 points scored in this game. So a pretty high scoring game. So I like Clint Capela here versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Okay, now here's a nice value play on DraftKings. I like Robert Williams from the Boston Celtics playing the Dallas Mavericks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing centers. Robert Williams has averaged 20.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 15 minutes per game with a 15% usage rate. He scored 39, 38, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 21, 16, and 19 minutes. He's projected at 22.4 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 4.5 times value because he's 5,000 FanDuel salary, but he's 1,100 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. So I'm not playing Robert Williams on FanDuel, but I think he makes a really interesting value play on DraftKings. Now, Vegas thinks there's going to be 224.5 points scored in this game. Now, of course, he's a high risk, high reward play. He's a point per minute monster, averaging 1.39 fantasy points per minute. So if he can get anywhere near 20 minutes in this game, in this matchup, he should be able to crush value. So I like Robert Williams here versus the Dallas Mavericks.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.